19th century, look at the Italianate brackets. This building probably is pre-Civil War because this type of cornice was very popular in the 1840s and 50s on commercial structures. And just to your right is a residence. If anyone can imagine a residence in that block today. And this is the block before many changes took place. But what's interesting is, look at the north side of the street. Commercial activity had moved up this block totally, taken in a lot of structures. Some came down, some were converted. But this side of Main Street survives intact. And look at the number of 3, 3.5, 4-story buildings that stood in a row. Spectacular residences. And when the next time you pass this site, try to picture this. It's very difficult today to think that that block was ever purely residential. 2 more views of the same block. This is a detail of one of the houses in that block. Obviously, pre-Civil War, most likely an Italianate cornice added after the war, and then at the end of the 19th century, we have a front porch. And that's what's interesting about all of these structures. When you look at them, they grew and changed with every generation. This one survives, but its neighbors have all disappeared. Now, this is one of my favorite views because we know what was to the left, but to this side of what became Carroll County Bank, there are very few photos. This wonderful neoclassical building was most likely built, I would guess, around 1900 to 1910 and came down, I believe, in the 50s. Maybe some of you will know that better than I will. But look at the recessed panels. Look at the carving in the pilasters. The heavily modillioned cornice. And most likely, I would say that all of this was probably marble. If it's not marble, it's a white limestone. And I would imagine the interiors were probably paved and sheathed with white marble also. So it would have been a spectacular building. But right beside it, you have a pre-Civil War townhouse. And then you have an 1880s house here, all of which have disappeared now with the expansion of the bank on that site. Does anybody recognize this one? Okay. This is one of my favorite buildings that was downtown. To me, this really proclaims the exuberance and the wealth of Westminster in the late 19th century. This is the Thomas Building. And when we look at this, I want you to, again, pick out the details. Look at the rusticated stone, the carved columns. Does anybody recognize this doorway? It still survives. Yes. Right. Pardon me? Let me move on and you'll see. But the interesting thing about this structure, it served as a residence and an office. Even though it was the late 19th century when most people were building new buildings for businesses, Mr. Thomas still combined his office and his home. This is the entrance to the office. This is the domestic entrance. And from what we've been able to tell, the entire second floor and probably this back wing still was used for domestic purposes. But it didn't last very long. That's the thing about the most significant buildings in any town. They sit on the largest lots, so they are targets for redevelopment. And generally, magnificent buildings like this only last for a generation or two. It's very rare that they survive for 60, 70, 80, or 100 years. If they do, it's just a matter of luck. And that's what sits on the site today. Also a nice building, but if we had to choose between one or the other, wouldn't be a difficult choice for me, but this is also, I think, a significant building. Pardon me?
Is that the doorway? You said they say.
No, it's out on Railroad Avenue across from, what is it, the Hyundai dealer? It's a small building, and they pulled all the stonework from the door when that building was constructed and added that to it. One of my favorite sayings, build it up, tear it down, because as I said, the best ones never seem to last very long. They come and they go very quickly. And this is the first example of that. And we all know what replaced this building. Which unfortunately did not last very long, as we said. Once the automobile took over in America, trains became superfluous. At the end of World War II, we see train traffic falling about 70% in the first 5 years after the war. Freight was now moved by trucks. It didn't travel on trains anymore. There were no passengers because now everybody had at least one car. Most families had two. And why wait in line to get on a train, get off a train, when you could get in your own vehicle and go wherever you wanted to? So unfortunately, we lost this building. Another example of redevelopment in a residential area. This is the building that came down for Locust Lane. Now, when it came down, of course, it didn't look like this. It had been altered practically beyond recognition. But what a nice 3-story frame house sitting in the center of Westminster. Look at the features like the balcony, the paired brackets on the cornice, the hoods over the windows. Now, this one's been gone. We're not sure how long, but quite some time, because I think it probably, this is John Street, if that helps you, and this is Main. And I'm not sure, but I think this one probably disappeared before the relocation of John Street. But again, those patriotic Westminster people, look at this. And great ad, too. Again, East Main. We all know this building, but these have long since been demolished. This is where the phone company is now, or what was the phone company. I'm not sure they still have. The sheer brick-faced building on East Main. The phone company started in this structure here, in a few small rooms in the early 20th century, and expanded to basically take over half that block. And this building probably dates from the 1840s. Two buildings again on East Main, side by side. Interesting arrangement with the basement having the main entrance to the house. That's not seen very often. Obviously, the lay of the land rose as it does in this part of town, but the builder wanted the main entrance to be here. And my guess is that there was probably a business in this portion. These came down to build this, which survives in an altered form. But look at what they were selling in the 20s. I don't know if you can see it, but they were selling General Tires. We can just see here HUP, so that's probably Hupmobile. And then there was something that I've never heard of called Star Cars. Has anybody ever heard of Star Cars? Yeah. Okay. Now, I included this one again because we're in the portion about demolition, but what a loss this was. Think how easy it would have been to rehab that for office space. And probably, if they had, they would have made more money on the site. We're now at the Forks. Pennsylvania Avenue goes one way, West Main the other.
What's that location?
It's where Vince's Seafood is now. And this is another view of the building as after the front porch came off and it was updated. And if any of you remember reading in the Times recently about this fountain. But this was an odd-shaped building. Let me show you. From this side, it appears to be totally rectilinear. And then in this view, you can see that the building followed the shape of the lot. So that must have been an interesting structure that's at the Forks. This was just behind it. It was called, I believe, the Cassell Home? Castle, okay. All right.
Jerry,
Yes.
you alluded to something in the Times about the fountain.
Yes.
About the statue. What was it?
There was a question about if it survived, where it was located, and I think its present location is at Glenburn Farm. This obviously is a demolition photo. This is the site of Vince's Seafood here. You can see that there was already one gas station at that site, but one is never enough. There always have to be more gas stations, particularly in the mid-20th century. We couldn't have enough gas stations, we couldn't have enough cars. And this now, of course, is PNC Bank. And my guess is that that structure has been reworked so many times, but we still have the guts of the 1950s gas station, just from where it's located on the lot. Did it come down?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, they built on the exact same site then. Now, this structure sat on West Main, where the gas station is now. Right at kind of catty-corner from the Carroll Theater, the Orndorff House, one of the largest houses in Westminster in the late 19th century. Again, it sat on a large lot, so therefore it was ripe for redevelopment. Came down in the mid-20th century, and I think, again, this was one of our greatest losses, because look at the square footage that are captured in this structure. And one thing I want to talk about are the towers. Frederick's called, Spire Town or Church Town. If we still had all of our houses with towers, they'd be calling us Tower Town. Because from the research I've done and what I've seen, there were approximately 30 houses in Westminster in the late 19th century that had towers such as this. Just an amazing number. I've never seen another community that has as many houses with towers, which again brings us back to the economy and what was going on here, that everybody could afford a modern house and with a tower. Now we're back to West Main. You can just see the corner of the Davis Buick building here. And if you remember the earlier pictures, there were 3 of these in a row. The first one went to build the Davis Buick showroom. The next one came down to build another gas station. And as much as I like Buicks, I still would have kept the house. And this is a great photo if you like old cars, because they're everywhere on Davis Buick's lot. Now, this is a great example of a house from the early 19th century that's been rehabbed, added onto, and changed numerous times. When we first found this one, there was a question of where it was located. The back of the photo said, site of Carroll Theater. And we kept looking and comparing how it might have sat on the lot. And you can see a stone foundation here, a brick foundation here. So what we're dealing with is an early 19th century side hall federal house that has been added onto probably in the 3rd quarter of the 19th century, Everything from this downspout over is new, and then to unify the structure, they added this porch. And take a look at this, because you'll be seeing this one in just a minute. And isn't that a magnificent house? This is the previous structure. These two sat side by side. And again, look at the height of this house. You're almost 4 stories up. And the interesting thing about this house is the multiplicity of details. Look at every sash, practically has different fenestration. This is a stained glass that most likely is on a landing, the staircase. Look at the colored glass here, the small Queen Anne style windows here, the small railings, the balcony, and the festooning that the flag covers. But look at this detail. You can just barely see that little swag. Now, the building, this is a copy of the Sanborn map from the late 19th century, and you can just barely see the outline of the house that it was on the previous slide. See the rounded porch? This is where the Carroll Theater is. This is Barnes Bollinger Insurance. And this is where Ain't That a Frame is now, if that helps you. And I included this one for one reason. I want you to look at the contrast between this building, which we still have, and look what's sat beside it. Let me go back, and you can get a much better idea. That was quite a loss. And since I found these two photographs, I can't go by this block without trying to imagine all of these houses in place. Because, and I hope that you'll come away today with an appreciation of what we were rather than what we are in Westminster today. And I think this one says it all. I don't have to explain what happened here. Time moved on, and people saw other uses and ways to adapt their structures. Westminster United Methodist Church, before the appendage of the modern facade. Guess which one I'd choose? And this is where my wife and I go to church. And every time I walk in that front door, I'm like, oh, look what they've done. Another view of the same structure. Does anybody recognize this one? Okay. Now let's move forward in time. Spire is gone. Yes, Davis Library, where I spent a lot of time. And this one, of course, is on West Main. I think one of the most impressive buildings of the late 19th century in Westminster before the modern porch went on in the 20th century. The old high school, before it was truncated and all of this was removed.
Would you say that's called truncated?
When you remove a large portion of a building, the top floor or a tower, it's called you're truncating the building, you're removing part of it.
It's on Center Street.
Yes. Mm-hmm. The YMCA owns it now.
They're not doing anything.
No, they aren't. Hopefully someone will at some point. Now, we should all recognize this one.
No, we don't.
Let me tell you why. This is Western Maryland College, Old Bain. This is the house that was called Terrace Hill, the Reif Snyders. This is what it looked like when it was completed. Very different from what we see today. And the most interesting thing about this is that every direction that this man could, he added bay windows, added towers, added porches, added gables. And we've got, I think, yes, the windmill too. But look, everywhere you look, this property is fully developed. There's barely space to walk. And another interesting thing about it is look how high the road is.
That would be Uniontown Road.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Jerry, tell them what road.
Uniontown Road. This is Uniontown Road right here. And to me, this is obviously, some people would call this a greenhouse. I call it a conservatory because look at the fenestration here. That was meant for relaxing, for viewing, has a greenhouse roof, but it looks like it was probably attached to the house on this side. Mr. Reif Snyder had the money to do whatever he wanted, obviously.
Isn't that still utilized by the college?
Yes, yes,
Offices?
it is, exactly. Very different in form now, though.
Lovely building.
Yes, beautiful building, interior and out.
Have you ever seen the picture where it had a spire on top of it?
Yes. And there it is, right there. But I wanted to show this one because look at the fretwork gables, the tower, all the details that have now disappeared. Unfortunately, I don't have one at the front, but there were Gothic-style railings all across the front porch. And this is to show you that this still goes on. And I hope I'm not insulting anyone, but I'm going to say what needs to be said about this building. This sits on East Main, catty-cornered from Sheets, and it was just brutalized within the last year or so. This building was in great shape structurally from what I could see from the exterior, and the new owner has completely gutted it, torn off any identifying elements. The two-story bay window disappeared very quickly. This porch is gone, the windows are gone, all the interiors have been, it's just simply the brick walls survived, virtually nothing else. And it changed from residential to a commercial use. But it could have been converted to a commercial use and these elements retained. But the new owner chose not to do that. And my fear is that as we go on in time, we'll see more of this than we will preservation. And that's what we all need to think about. And any of you that own or know people that own buildings on Main Street will hopefully try to convince them to work towards preservation rather than what this building has become. And I say our greatest loss because I want to personalize this to everybody in this room. I think we all have a stake in this town. We all spend our lives here, we work here, we live here, we shop here, and we just have to realize that each one of us is in some way responsible for things like this. Now, I want to show you the courthouse is here. Let's see. This is the Shellman House, and this is the building that we're going to focus on right here. The main court inn. This is the best known photograph of the main court inn, a structure that was built in the late 18th century, greatly altered through time as the uses and commerce demanded it. What we're looking at here are railings from the 1880s, a porch from the 1850s, windows from the 1830s. Look at the lintels. That's when things like this start to show up, the late 20s and 1830s. But the form of the building, whoever designed these changes, it all works. And that's what's important when you alter or add on to an historic structure, is that you plan the elements to fit into the existing structure. As time went on, the porch probably became very expensive to repair. And those of you with historic porches know that that's true. So the first thing to disappear was the character-defining element of the porch. We're dealing with something probably in the late 20s, early 30s here, but look what had made its way